There is a highly specific, radioactive type of tension that can only be bred in the claustrophobic confines of a budget cruise ship cabin. You take a blended family, cram them into a windowless 200-square-foot room that smells faintly of mildew and coconut sunscreen, and let them marinate in the blistering Mexican sun for 4 days. It is a recipe for absolute, unmitigated psychological warfare. And when sibling rivalry reaches its boiling point under these conditions, the resulting explosion rarely takes the form of a screaming match. No, the best familial revenge is quiet, surgical, and utterly petty. The annual family vacation was a tradition my father, Vance, insisted upon with militant enthusiasm. We never opted for the luxury liners with crystal chandeliers and string quartets. We were strictly a neon carpet and buffet line family. This particular year, we booked an extended itinerary sailing out of Los Angeles, pushing down to Ensenada, Mexico, with a newly added port of call, Catalina Island. I was 20 years old at the time, navigating the exhausting waters of early adulthood, while my younger stepsister, Vesper, had just turned 18. Our older stepsister, Isolde, was 21 and utterly detached from family politics, treating the vacation entirely as an excuse to tan. Rounding out the passenger manifest were my stepmother, Corinne, and 2 younger cousins, Cale and Thayer, whose parents had pawned them off on us for the week. Catalina Island is a strange, beautiful little anomaly off the coast of Southern California. It is famous for its rocky cliffs, roaming bison, and a complete lack of standard automobiles. The island's infrastructure simply doesn't support them, so residents and tourists alike navigate the winding, sun-baked roads using gas-powered golf carts. Stepping off the tender boat onto the cobblestone pier, the salt air was thick and heavy. We immediately split up to rent transportation. Because there were 8 of us, a single cart was out of the question. Vance, Corinne, Isolde, and I squeezed into the first cart. Vesper took the wheel of the second, flanked by our cousins Cale and 14-year-old Thayer. Now my father possesses a deeply ingrained, fiercely competitive streak that completely overrides his common sense. We were 10 minutes into our scenic drive, navigating a dirt road that clung perilously to the edge of a scrub brush ravine, when Vance locked eyes with Vesper in the rearview mirror. He grinned, revved the pathetic little engine, and yelled something about eating his dust. The race was on. It was a terrible idea from the exact moment of its inception. Golf carts are top-heavy, poorly suspended, and entirely devoid of safety features. Vance took a sharp left turn at a speed the vehicle was never engineered to handle. Vesper, refusing to be bested, mirrored the maneuver, but she swung too wide. Her front right tire caught a deep, rain-washed rut in the gravel. I watched the disaster unfold in agonizing slow motion over my shoulder. The chassis tipped. The fiberglass roof groaned. And then, with a sickening crunch of plastic and metal, Vesper's cart rolled completely onto its side, skidding to a halt in a cloud of choking, beige dust. We slammed on the brakes and sprinted back. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic chorus of coughing and panicked shouts. Miraculously, Vesper, the driver, crawled out of the wreckage without a single scratch on her face. She had a patch of minor road rash on her left calf and a scraped elbow, but was otherwise entirely intact. Cale was completely unharmed. Young Thayer, however, took the brunt of the impact. He had been sitting on the outside edge and caught his shoulder hard against the gravel. Within 20 minutes, the local paramedics arrived, took one look at the strange angle of his collarbone, and made the call. Given the island's limited medical facilities, Thayer was strapped to a backboard and airlifted by a Coast Guard helicopter straight back to a hospital in Los Angeles. He ended up perfectly fine, just a nasty fracture and a cool story for his freshman year. But his dramatic exit set a very strange tone for the rest of the day. With the actual victim airborne and out of the picture, Vesper realized there was a massive vacuum of sympathy just waiting to be filled. By the time we boarded the ship that evening, her minor road rash had somehow evolved into a debilitating, full-body trauma. She visited the ship's infirmary and managed to complain loudly enough to secure a pair of aluminum crutches. For the next 24 hours, Vesper was a martyr of the high seas. She hobbled through the Lido deck buffet, sighing dramatically while extending her slightly bandaged leg, forcing Corinne to carry her plate of powdered eggs and lukewarm bacon. She refused to navigate the narrow cabin hallways, instead demanding that the exhausted cruise staff wheel her around in a borrowed transport chair. Isolde and I exchanged exhausted, knowing glances. We had grown up with Vesper. We knew exactly how she operated. She was milking this microscopic injury for every drop of attention and servitude it could possibly yield. The following morning, the ship docked in Ensenada. The air was instantly hotter, thicker, smelling of diesel exhaust, fried tortillas, and cheap leather. Our absolute favorite tradition in this port was wandering the sprawling outdoor vendor markets. It was a labyrinth of colorful stalls, aggressive bargaining, and fantastic street food. We disembarked, with Vesper putting on an absolute clinic in theatrical suffering. Every step on her crutches was accompanied by a wince, a sharp intake of breath, or a muttered complaint about the uneven Mexican cobblestones. She forced Vance to carry her bottled water. She made Corrine hold her sunglasses. Eventually, the midday heat became oppressive, and we collapsed into the plastic chairs of a shaded, open-air cantina. This is where the geography of our location becomes entirely relevant. In Mexico, the legal drinking age is 18. Vesper had crossed that threshold exactly 2 weeks prior. After 30 minutes of listening to her incessant, grating complaints about her throbbing calf, Corrine finally snapped. Thinking it would act as a localized anesthetic for her mood, my stepmother waved down the waiter and ordered Vesper a massive blended strawberry margarita. The glass arrived, beaded with condensation and rimmed with thick, coarse salt. Vesper wrapped both hands around it, looking incredibly smug, and took a long, greedy sip. It was nothing short of a medical miracle. Perhaps it was the tequila, perhaps it was the sugar, or perhaps she simply forgot the script she was reading from. But 10 minutes later, when a vendor walked past selling intricate, hand-painted sugar skulls, Vesper stood up. She didn't use the crutches, she didn't wince. She simply walked with perfect fluid biomechanics straight across the cantina to examine the merchandise. Isolde choked on her beer. Vance just stared at the abandoned aluminum crutches leaning against the plastic table. We all pointed it out. We mocked her relentlessly, pointing to her perfectly functioning limbs. Caught in her own web, Vesper flushed a deep, angry red, but didn't bother picking the crutches back up. For the next 3 hours, the phantom pain was entirely cured. We shopped, we ate, we laughed. The suffocating cloud of her dramatics had finally lifted. Until, of course, it was time to leave. By late afternoon, our collective arms were laden with heavy canvas bags full of ceramic pottery, woven blankets, and cheap silver jewelry. The walk back to the shuttle bus pickup zone was long and uphill. I looked over at Vesper, expecting her to grab her own oversized shopping bag. Instead, she abruptly buckled at the knee. She let out a sharp gasp, clutching her mildly scraped calf as if a sniper had just clipped her from a nearby rooftop. "I can't," she whined, her voice instantly dropping back into that grating, pitiable register. "It's flaring up again, the nerve pain, I need my crutches." She forced Vance to carry her heavy ceramic bowls. She made Isolde take her woven blankets. I refused to touch her bags, which earned me a vicious, heated glare. Vesper snatched her crutches and began the slow, agonizing, entirely fictional hobble back toward the buses, barking orders at us the entire way. The shuttle bus ride back to the port was an absolute nightmare. The vehicle was unair-conditioned, smelling heavily of hot vinyl and sweat. Vesper secured a priority seat at the front, forcing an elderly woman to shift over, and spent the entire 15-minute ride verbally abusing us. She called Isolde selfish for bumping her crutch. She snapped at Vance for breathing too heavily. When I told her to drop the act because we all saw her sprinting for a taco stand an hour ago, she turned her venom fully onto me. She called me a long string of highly creative, incredibly foul names, her voice echoing over the rattle of the bus engine. The hostility radiating from her was palpable. By the time we cleared customs and stepped back onto the heavily air-conditioned deck of the cruise ship, my patience had entirely evaporated. I wasn't just annoyed anymore, I was calculating. We reached the long, narrow corridor leading to our shared cabin. The moment Vance swiped the keycard and the heavy metal door clicked open, a visceral, desperate reality set in. We had been drinking blended margaritas and eating street food all afternoon. The immediate, urgent need to use the restroom was universal. I stepped into the room, dropped my bags, and made a direct, purposeful stride toward the small bathroom door. Vesper lunged forward, moving with the agility of an Olympic sprinter. "No, I'm going first," she shrieked, entirely abandoning the crutches, which clattered loudly against the thin closet doors. "I'm already here," I replied calmly, putting my hand on the brass doorknob. "I am injured," she screamed, her face contorting into a mask of pure, spoiled fury. "Move. You're a miserable, selfish bitch, move out of my way." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stepped inside, slid the deadbolt into place with a satisfying, heavy click, and leaned against the door. Immediately, Vesper's fists began pounding against the imitation wood. The thin walls of the cabin vibrated with every strike. She was screaming now, a full-blown, toddler-level meltdown, hurling insults that would make a sailor blush. She cursed my existence, she cursed the food, she demanded I hurry up, her voice cracking with sheer, unfiltered rage. Vance and Corrine had conveniently slipped out to grab towels, leaving us entirely alone in the suite. I stood in the center of the tiny, tiled room, listening to the muffled shrieks of my tormentor. I looked at the toilet. Then I looked at the wall dispenser. Cruise ship bathrooms are notoriously Spartan, but they always provide a backup supply of necessities. There was a half-used roll of toilet paper currently on the spindle. Tucked neatly on a high shelf above the mirror were 3 brand-new, individually wrapped backup rolls. An idea bloomed in my mind. It was a dark, beautiful, and utterly wicked idea. Moving with total silence, I unspooled the remaining paper from the active roll, folding it neatly and shoving it deep into the bottom of my woven beach bag. I reached up to the shelf, grabbed the 3 backup rolls, and tossed them into the bag as well. I checked the cabinets under the sink. Nothing. I checked the shower caddy. Nothing. I had successfully stripped the room of every single square of sanitary tissue. I flushed the toilet for effect, ran the tap water, and washed my hands. The pounding on the door had escalated to frantic kicking. "I'm coming out," I called back smoothly, my voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I unlocked the door and swung it open. Vesper practically tackled me out of the way, her face flushed red with exertion and fury. She shoved past me, slamming the door shut so hard the hinges rattled, and immediately threw the deadbolt. I didn't linger. I slung my beach bag over my shoulder, grabbed my sunglasses, and walked out of the cabin. The ship's adults-only pool was located on the top deck aft side. It was quiet, peaceful, and entirely devoid of screaming teenagers. I found an empty lounger in the shade, ordered a violently blue cocktail from a passing waiter, and stretched out. The ocean breeze felt magnificent. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed against the plastic table. It was a text from Vesper. "Where is the TP?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink. I didn't reply. 30 seconds later, another text stopped playing. "Bring me paper right now." Another sip. The ice clinked pleasantly against the glass. Then the phone began to vibrate continuously. "Incoming call, Vesper." I watched her contact name flash on the screen until it went to voicemail. Then she called again, and again. "You psychotic bitch," a new text read. "Bring it back. I know you took it." I knew exactly what was happening in that cabin. Vance and Corrine had gone straight from the towel kiosk to the spa showers. Isolde was currently deeply asleep on a sunned 3 decks below me. Vesper was utterly, completely isolated in a 2x3-foot tiled box, entirely at the mercy of the universe. I put my phone on airplane mode, closed my eyes, and listened to the rhythmic churning of the ship's massive engines. It was the most relaxed I had felt all week. I stayed by that pool for nearly 2 hours. By the time I finally ambled back down to our deck, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the tacky carpet of the hallway. When I entered the cabin, Vesper was sitting on the edge of her lower bunk. She looked utterly defeated. Her arms were crossed, her face a mask of cold, silent fury. Later, I learned the full extent of her humiliation. After 45 minutes of agonizing waiting, realizing that her texts were going unread and her calls unanswered, she had been forced to use the bathroom's emergency landline to call the ship's guest services. She had to explain to a highly confused concierge that she was trapped on the toilet without supplies. It took another 20 minutes for a bewildered housekeeping attendant to unlock the main cabin door, knock on the bathroom door, and pass a single, fresh roll of cheap, single-ply paper through a cracked opening. When the rest of the family finally regrouped for dinner, and the story inevitably came out, Vesper tried to frame it as a horrific abuse of her fragile, injured state. But Vance just stared at her, then at me, and let out a booming, uncontrollable laugh. Isolde nearly choked on her bread roll. Even Corrine had to hide her smile behind her napkin. The sheer audacity of the heist, coupled with Vesper's miraculous, selective healing throughout the day, meant that the jury of our peers found me entirely innocent. Vesper didn't speak to me for the remainder of the cruise. Even better, she entirely abandoned the crutches, realizing that playing the victim had suddenly become a very dangerous game. Sometimes, the universe doesn't deliver karma fast enough. Sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands. You don't need to scream and you don't need to fight. True victory lies in patience, timing, and knowing exactly what your opponent takes for granted. Like gravity, oxygen, or a fresh roll of 2-ply. If you've ever had to enact your own brand of petty revenge against a sibling, drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this tale of familial warfare, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Until next time, stay petty and always check the dispenser before you sit down.